Husband wants a divorce, but his wife forced him to spend the last night with her. She vanished afterward, and he regrets it. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Family Stories. Heavenly Father, wrap Mr. Peter Stories readers, this beautiful family, in your unending love and comfort. May their hearts be filled with courage, their paths lit with hope, and their souls enriched with the beauty of your presence. Let them always feel your gentle hand guiding them home. Amen. I read your comments, and let me tell you, they were absolutely unbelievable. You always touch my heart with your words, and today I have some wonderful news to share with you all. I've become a grandfather. Yes, you heard it right. My daughter Marisol is in the hospital with Binta, and we now have a precious baby boy in our family, a grandson. We've been thinking of names for him, and I'd love to hear your suggestions. What do you think of names like Ethan, Noah, Leo, Benjamin, or Oliver? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So, my beautiful family, tell me, how did you find the last story? Did you like it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's dive into today's story together as one big, loving family. The cherry blossoms painted Washington, D.C.'s sky in delicate strokes of pink and white on that fateful spring morning of 2019. Georgetown University's historic campus stirred with the usual bustle of ambitious students. But something in the air felt different, as if the city itself knew it was about to witness the beginning of an extraordinary love story. Boeta Dipanar stood at the entrance of the McDonough School of Business, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the cobblestone path. At 32, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, already carrying himself with the confident air of a successful businessman rather than a final-year MBA student. His journey to this moment had been carefully calculated, each step meticulously planned since his early days as a software developer in Silicon Valley. The morning sun caught the silver threading in his suit as he checked his Patek Philippe watch, a reminder of his first successful startup exit. 7 minutes until his presentation on emerging technologies in the financial sector. 7 minutes that would change his life, though not in the way he expected. That's when he saw her. Avalie Charm wasn't supposed to be there. As an art curator for the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, she rarely ventured into Georgetown's business school territory. But fate had other plans that morning when her usual coffee shop near the mall was unexpectedly closed for renovations. The barista had recommended this little cafe tucked away in the business school's courtyard, insisting it served the best Ethiopian blend in D.C. She moved through the courtyard like a breath of fresh air, her elegant frame draped in a flowing marigold dress that caught the morning light. Her braids were styled in an intricate crown, adorned with small golden clips that sparkled with each step. At 28, Avalie had already made a name for herself in DC's competitive art scene, known for her ability to discover emerging artists and her innovative approaches to cultural preservation. Their paths crossed at the cafe's entrance. Boeta, typically hyper-aware of his surroundings, was absorbed in reviewing his presentation notes one final time. Avalie, her mind filled with the details of an upcoming exhibition, was fishing for her wallet in her oversized leather bag. The collision was gentle but enough to send her phone clattering to the ground. "I'm so sorry," they both said in unison, reaching for the phone at the same time. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment, the bustling world of Georgetown University faded away. Boeta found himself staring into eyes that held the warmth of honey and the depth of ancient stories. Avalie found herself caught in the intense gaze of a man whose face seemed to hold both unwavering determination and, surprisingly, a hint of poetry. "Please, allow me," Boeta said, his voice carrying traces of his South African heritage as he retrieved her phone. The screen was cracked, a spiderweb of lines across the glass. "Oh no," Avalee sighed, taking the phone from him. I just had it fixed last week. These DC sidewalks have it out for my phones, I swear. I insist on paying for the repair, Boetta said, reaching for his wallet. It was entirely my fault. Avalee waved him off with a smile that would haunt his dreams for years to come. It's just a phone. Besides, I believe in signs. Sometimes the universe breaks things so we can find something new. The philosophical response caught him off guard. In his world of spreadsheets and market projections, such whimsy was rare. Yet something about her perspective intrigued him. At least let me buy you a coffee to apologize, he offered, glancing at his watch. 5 minutes until his presentation. He should have been heading to the auditorium, running through his talking points one last time. Instead, he found himself hoping she'd say yes. I wouldn't want to make you late, Avalee replied, nodding toward the folder in his hands with his presentation materials. Those charts and graphs look important. They can wait, Boetta heard himself say, surprising both of them. For the first time in his meticulously planned life, he was willing to let something important slide. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Avalee studied him for a moment, her artist's eye taking in the details. The precise knot of his tie, the careful arrangement of his cufflinks, the way he stood as if the world might need adjusting to meet his standards. She saw ambition, yes, but also something deeper, something yearning to break free from self-imposed constraints. Well, Mr. Dippenaar, Boetta Dippenaar. Well, Mr. Dippenaar, I'm Avalee Charm, and I accept your coffee invitation on one condition. Name it. We don't talk about business, charts, or graphs. Just for 15 minutes, let's pretend we're in a world where success is measured in moments, not metrics. The proposition should have seemed absurd to him. He had built his life on metrics, on measuring every variable, on calculating every risk. Yet, as cherry blossom petals danced around them in the spring breeze, Boetta found himself nodding. They found a small table in the corner of the cafe, away from the morning rush of students. Avalee ordered an Ethiopian blend with a dash of cinnamon. Boetta, his usual double espresso. As they waited for their drinks, she told him about the young artist she'd discovered in a tiny studio in Adams Morgan, whose work reminded her of Basquiat, but with a distinctly Washington flavor. He found himself sharing stories about growing up in Johannesburg, about the first computer program he wrote at 12, about the moment he decided to leave everything behind and chase his dreams in America. The minutes slipped away like sand through an hourglass. Boetta's phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from his classmates wondering where he was. The presentation that had seemed so crucial just 20 minutes ago now felt distant, less significant than understanding why Avalee's eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, or how she used her hands to paint pictures in the air as she spoke. "You're going to be terribly late," she said finally, noticing his phone's persistent vibrating. "I already am," he replied, surprised to find he didn't care as much as he should have. "Then go," she said softly. "Go change the world with your charts and graphs, Mr. Dippenaar." He stood reluctantly, gathering his materials. "And you? Will you go back to finding beauty in unexpected places, Miss Charm?" "That's the plan." She reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. It was unlike any he'd seen before. Handmade paper with her contact information written in elegant calligraphy, in case you ever want to see the world through a different lens. Boetta took the card, noticing the slight roughness of the paper, the way the ink seemed to dance across its surface. He offered his own card in return, sleek, minimalist, embossed with his company's logo. "The ultimate contrast," Avalee laughed, comparing the two cards. "Art meets commerce." "Perhaps that's not such a bad combination," Boetta suggested, reluctant to leave. "Perhaps not," she agreed, her smile holding promises neither of them yet understood. He walked backward for a few steps, memorizing the way she looked in that moment. The marigold dress, the crowned braids, the knowing smile. Later, during his hastily delivered presentation, his mind kept wandering back to the cafe. His professors noted that he seemed distracted, less precise than usual. His colleagues whispered about how unlike him it was to be late. But for the first time in his carefully constructed life, Boeta Dipinar had glimpsed a different kind of success. One measured not in profit margins or market shares, but in the way his heart raced when she laughed, in the perfect temperature of coffee gone cold, because conversation was more important than drinking it, in the gentle flutter of cherry blossom petals marking the beginning of something extraordinary. That evening, as the sun set over the Potomac, casting the city in shades of gold and purple, Boeta sat in his penthouse apartment in Logan Circle, turning Avalee's handmade business card over and over in his hands. The city lights began to twinkle like stars, and for once, he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings or market projections. Instead, he was wondering about the exact shade of honey in a pair of eyes that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed facade. In her own apartment in Adams Morgan, surrounded by art books and half-finished paintings, Avalee added his business card to her inspiration board, a stark, geometric contrast to the flowing, organic pieces surrounding it. She hadn't told him that she'd recognized his name, that she'd read about the young South African tech prodigy in the Washington Post's business section. She hadn't mentioned that she'd been fascinated by the contradiction in his press photos, the ruthless businessman with eyes that hinted at hidden depths. Neither of them could have known that this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, love, and the careful plans we make for our lives. But perhaps some part of them sensed it, in the way time seemed to slow down in that cafe, in the lingering glances and unspoken words, in the peculiar feeling that the universe had orchestrated their collision with meticulous care. The cherry blossoms continued to fall, coating Georgetown's pathways in a carpet of pink and white, nature's reminder that the most beautiful things in life often come unplanned. And in a city built on power, ambition, and carefully calculated moves, two souls had just taken their first steps toward a destiny neither of them could have predicted. That night, both of them dreamed in shades they'd never seen before. Boeta's world of black and white spreadsheets suddenly invaded by splashes of marigold, Avalee's artistic visions now containing precise geometric patterns that somehow made her wild colors shine brighter. Washington, D.C. had witnessed countless historic moments, but as the cherry blossoms drifted down in the gentle spring breeze, the city held its breath, knowing it was witnessing the beginning of something extraordinary. Little did they know that this was just the first chapter of a story that would test the boundaries between ambition and love, between carefully laid plans and the beautiful chaos of destiny. In the coming months and years, their lives would intertwine in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, sacrifice, and the true measure of a life well lived. But for now, in this moment, all that existed was the memory of coffee gone cold, the lingering scent of cherry blossoms, and two souls who had glimpsed, however briefly, the possibility of a different kind of happiness in a city known for its relentless pursuit of power and success. Chapter 2. Dancing in the Rain. 2 weeks had passed since their chance encounter at Georgetown, and Washington, D.C. had settled into the languid rhythm of late spring. The cherry blossoms had given way to full green leaves, and the city hummed with the energy of approaching summer. Boeta Dipinar had thrown himself back into his carefully structured routine, but found his thoughts constantly drifting to a handmade business card he now kept in his wallet. He had drafted and deleted 17 text messages to Avalee Charm. Each attempt felt either too formal or too casual, too eager or too aloof. For a man who regularly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals, the inability to compose a simple message was maddening. The rational part of his brain told him to focus on his upcoming graduation and the expansion plans for his company. Yet every time he passed a gallery or caught a glimpse of Marigold in a shop window, his carefully constructed focus wavered. Avalie, meanwhile, had immersed herself in preparations for a major exhibition at the National Portrait Gallery. Her days were filled with artist meetings, installation plans, and endless email chains about lighting and placement. But sometimes, during her morning coffee run, now permanently rerouted through Georgetown, she found herself scanning the business school's courtyard, wondering about the man whose calculated exterior had cracked just enough to show something more intriguing underneath. Their second meeting wasn't planned, much like their first. It was a collision of circumstance and timing that would later seem too perfect to be coincidental. The afternoon had started typically enough. Boetta was leaving a meeting with potential investors on K Street, his mind occupied with projected growth rates and market penetration strategies. Avalie was finishing a walkthrough of a new installation at the Hirshhorn Museum. The summer sky over D.C. had been threatening rain all day, dark clouds gathering above the Washington Monument like spectators awaiting a show. Their paths converged on the National Mall. Boetta, taking a rare moment to walk rather than catch his usual ride, found himself drawn to the open space, a brief respite from the city's endless glass and concrete. Avalie, choosing to cut across the mall on her way to the metro, was lost in thought about the upcoming exhibition. The first drops of rain fell softly, almost apologetically. Then, as if someone had turned on a celestial faucet, the sky opened up. The typical DC crowd scattered like startled pigeons, rushing for cover under trees and museum awnings. But Avalie stood. Still, the rain falls gently on her face. Boetta spotted her from 20 yards away, a singular still point in the chaos of retreating tourists and locals. Her white sundress was already soaking through, and her braids were catching raindrops like stars. He should have rushed for cover like everyone else. He had another meeting in an hour, and his Italian suit wasn't designed for impromptu showers. Instead, he found himself walking toward her. "Miss Charm," he called out over the sound of the rain, "I believe this is what they call a proper Washington welcome." Avalie turned, and her smile could have lit up the darkened sky. "Mr. Dippenar," she laughed, "don't tell me you scheduled this weather in your perfectly planned day." "I'm afraid this is entirely off schedule," he admitted, water dripping from his perfectly knotted tie. "I should probably—" "Dance with me," she interrupted, holding out her hand. "I'm sorry?" "Dance with me," she repeated. "When was the last time you did something completely unplanned, something that had no ROI, no strategic value, nothing but the pure joy of the moment?" Boetta looked around at the empty mall, at the rain creating patterns on the reflecting pool, at the Washington Monument rising like a silent guardian above them. His phone was buzzing in his pocket, probably his assistant reminding him about the next meeting. His shoes were Italian leather, his suit was bespoke, and his hair, usually immaculate, was plastered to his forehead. "I don't dance," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he found himself stepping closer to her. "Everyone dances," Avalie insisted. "Some of us just forget how—" She took his hand before he could protest further. Her fingers were warm despite the rain, and something electric shot through him at the contact. She pulled him into a simple spin, and then they were moving together on the empty mall, the rain their only music. "This is absurd," Boetta laughed, but he didn't let go of her hand. "Absolutely," Avalie agreed, her eyes sparkling. "Isn't it wonderful?" They danced, if you could call it dancing, in the summer rain, their movements a strange mixture of waltz and freestyle, formal and wild. Avalie kicked off her heels, encouraging Boetta to feel the wet grass under his expensive shoes. They spun and laughed, and for a few precious minutes they weren't a rising tech mogul and an accomplished curator. They were just two people dancing in the rain, letting the warm water wash away their carefully constructed personas. "You're going to make me late for my meeting," Boetta said, but there was no regret in his voice. "Am I? Or am I making you exactly on time for something else?" Avalee's response was playful, but her eyes held a challenge. They were close now, the rain creating an intimate bubble around them. Boetta could see the droplets clinging to her eyelashes, the way her wet dress hugged her curves, the slight tremble in her lips that might have been from the cold or something else entirely. "Sometimes," Avalee said softly, "the best moments in life are unplanned." The kiss, when it came, was as natural as the rain falling around them. Boetta's hands found her waist, pulling her closer. Avalee's fingers traced the wet line of his jaw, erasing the boundary between business and pleasure, between calculation and spontaneity. They kissed as the rain fell, as tourists huddled under distant awnings took photos of the crazy couple on the mall, as the city continued its eternal dance around them. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, the rain had begun to ease. The sun was breaking through the clouds, creating a strange golden quality to the light. "I should go," Avalee said, but she didn't move away. "I have a meeting with the gallery board in—" She checked her phone, which had somehow survived the downpour. 20 minutes ago. "I should go too," Boetta agreed, equally stationary. His own phone had been buzzing consistently for the past 10 minutes. They stood there, dripping wet, neither wanting to break the spell that had fallen over them. Finally, Avalee took a step back, collecting her discarded shoes from the wet grass. "You know," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "normal people usually go to dinner before they dance in the rain." "Is that an invitation, Miss Charm?" "That depends, Mr. Dippenar. Are you brave enough to let someone else plan the evening?" The old Boetta, the one who existed before this rain-soaked afternoon, would have insisted on choosing the restaurant, making the reservations, controlling every aspect of the experience. But that Boetta hadn't danced in the rain on the National Mall. "Tomorrow night," he said. "Surprise me." Avalee's smile was worth every ruined stitch of his suit. She turned to go, then paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Wear something you don't mind getting a little messy, and leave your phone at home." She walked away, her wet dress clinging to her legs, her bare feet leaving temporary impressions in the grass. Boetta watched her go, aware that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. Later that evening, as he sat in his penthouse reviewing quarterly projections, Boetta found himself distracted by the sound of rain against his windows. His suit hung in the bathroom, probably ruined, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He touched his lips, still feeling the ghost of their kiss, the warmth of her body against his in the rain. In her art-filled apartment, Avalee added another piece to her inspiration board, a photograph a tourist had posted on Instagram of two figures dancing in the rain on the National Mall, their forms blurred but their joy palpable. She was planning tomorrow's date, but not in the way Boetta would plan a business meeting. Her plans involved spontaneity, chance, and the kind of magic that couldn't be captured in a spreadsheet. The rain continued to fall over Washington, D.C., cleaning the marble monuments and making the city lights blur like impressionist paintings. Somewhere between the power lunches and policy meetings, between the art galleries and tech startups, two people had found something real in the summer rain. Their dance on the mall had lasted less than an hour, but its echoes would resonate through their lives in ways neither of them could yet imagine. As night fell over the Capitol, the Washington Monument stood like a silent witness to their afternoon of spontaneity. The city that ran on schedules and agendas, on power plays and careful calculations, had witnessed something rare, a moment of pure, unplanned joy. And though neither Boetta nor Avalee could know it yet, that rain-soaked dance was just the beginning of a story that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, success, and the beautiful chaos of letting go. Tomorrow would bring its own adventures, its own challenges, its own opportunities for magic. But for now, in separate parts of the city, two people fell asleep to the sound of rain, their dreams filled with wet grass, warm kisses, and the promise of something wonderful and entirely unplanned. Chapter 3. Building Dreams. The Jefferson Memorial stood like a luminous sentinel in the early morning light, its marble dome catching the first rays of dawn. It was the first day of May, exactly 1 year after their rain-soaked dance on the National Mall, and Washington, D.C. was adorned in its spring finest for what the local society pages were calling the wedding of the season. Boetta Dippenaar stood at the base of the memorial steps, his black tuxedo impeccable, his heart racing with an emotion he couldn't quite quantify in his usual spreadsheets. The past year had been a whirlwind of love, growth, and surprising discoveries. Their first date had led to a second, then a 20th, then to a small apartment they shared in Adams Morgan, where business plans and art pieces competed for wall space. In his pocket, he carried a handwritten note, their first correspondence, the business card with its elegant calligraphy now worn soft at the edges from constant handling. His proposal hadn't been planned. Avalie was rubbing off on him. It had happened on a random Tuesday evening when she was painting in their living room, barefoot and splattered with colours, and he realized he never wanted to come home to any other sight. Inside the memorial, Avalie Charm stood before a vintage mirror, her wedding dress a masterpiece of silk and lace that seemed to capture and reflect every nuance of light. The dress, like everything about their relationship, was a perfect blend of classic and contemporary, structured elegance with unexpected artistic touches. Small, hand-painted flowers adorned the hem, each one done by Avalie herself in the quiet hours of dawn when inspiration struck. "You're sure about this?" her mother asked, adjusting the crown of fresh cherry blossoms that replaced a traditional veil. "He's so structured." Avalie smiled, remembering how that very structure had gradually revealed its own kind of beauty. She thought of the way Boetta now left his phone behind during their Sunday brunches, how he'd learned to appreciate the beauty of imperfection, how his precise nature had given her art a new dimension of depth. "I'm sure," she said, touching the small painting she'd tucked into her bouquet, a miniature of them dancing in the rain, their figures abstracted, but the joy unmistakable. "He makes the chaos make sense." The ceremony was intimate, despite the pressure from DC's social circles to make it a grand affair. Only their closest friends and family gathered under the dome of the Jefferson Memorial, while cherry blossom petals danced on the morning breeze. The early hour meant tourists were few, though those present couldn't help but stop and stare at the scene unfolding. When Avalie appeared at the top of the steps, Boetta felt time stop. She descended like a living work of art, each step graceful and unhurried. The rising sun through the memorial's columns created a natural spotlight, and for a moment he was transported back to that first morning at Georgetown, when she'd walked into his carefully ordered world and rearranged everything. Their vows were a reflection of their journey, his methodically written but delivered with raw emotion, hers spontaneously spoken but with an underlying structure that made him smile in recognition. They had learned from each other, grown into each other's spaces like vines finding the perfect wall to climb. "I promise to be your safe harbor," Boetta said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "while giving you the freedom to sail wherever your art takes you." "And I promise," Avalie responded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "to help you see the beauty in the unplanned moments, while respecting the dreams you've built with such care." The reception was held in the courtyard of the National Portrait Gallery, where Avalie had recently been promoted to senior curator. The space had been transformed into an enchanted garden, with hanging lights and art installations created by Avalie's artist friends. Each table featured a small, original painting depicting different locations around DC that had been significant in their relationship. The Georgetown Cafe, the rain-soaked mall, their favorite Eastern Market breakfast spot. As they shared their first dance, Boetta surprised everyone, especially Avalee, by leading her in a perfectly executed waltz. "I've been taking lessons," he admitted, as he spun her beneath the twinkling lights. "Some things are worth planning for." The evening was a perfect blend of their worlds. Startup founders mingled with gallery artists, politicians chatted with street performers, and somewhere in between, two different approaches to life found their harmony. When Avalee threw her bouquet, it was caught by a young intern from Boetta's company who had been shyly flirting with one of Avalee's artist friends all evening. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the cleanup crews were quietly at work, Boetta and Avalee slipped away to their new apartment in Logan Circle. It was a stunning penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, but what made it perfect was the converted sunroom they'd transformed into Avalee's studio. The morning light would flood the space, casting her canvases in the same golden glow that had surrounded their first meeting. "Welcome home, Mrs. Charm Dippenar," Boetta said as they stood on their balcony, the city lights twinkling below like earthbound stars. "Home," Avalee repeated, tasting the word. She leaned into him, her wedding dress rustling softly. "You know, when we first met, I never thought I'd fall in love with a man who color-codes his closet. And I never thought I'd marry a woman who uses my quarterly reports as inspiration for abstract art." He chuckled, remembering the day he'd found one of his presentations transformed into a striking mixed-media piece that now hung in their dining room. The next few months were a dance of adjustment and discovery. Boetta's tech startup, Capital Tech Solutions, was gaining momentum, attracting attention from major investors and tech publications. Avalee's innovative approaches to curation were making waves in the art world, bringing fresh perspectives to traditional spaces. Their apartment became a testament to their merged lives. Boetta's minimalist aesthetic blended surprisingly well with Avalee's artistic chaos. His leather-bound business books shared shelf space with her art volumes. Her paintings brought color to his monochromatic office. His organizational systems somehow made her creative process more efficient without stifling it. They established rituals that honored both their natures. Sunday mornings were sacred. No phones, no emails, just them and the farmer's market at Eastern Market, followed by brunch at their favorite cafe. Tuesday evenings became their culture nights. Sometimes a gallery opening, sometimes a tech talk, taking turns immersing themselves in each other's worlds. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Boetta's work hours grew longer as the company expanded. Avalee's exhibition schedules became more demanding. They had to learn to navigate the demands of their careers while nurturing their relationship. Sometimes they succeeded brilliantly, like when Boetta set up a surprise virtual reality art installation in his office so Avalee could work on her curation remotely while spending time with him. Other times they struggled. Missed dinners, forgotten appointments, the small disappointments that come with two ambitious people building their dreams, yet they always found their way back to each other. On late nights, when Boetta was stuck at the office, Avalee would bring her sketchbook and work quietly in his presence, turning his technical diagrams into flowing abstracts. When Avalee was consumed with installation preparations, Boetta would bring his laptop to the gallery, filing reports amid the controlled chaos of her world. One particularly memorable evening, during a power outage that affected half the city, they found themselves sitting on their balcony, sharing takeout by candlelight. Avalee was wearing one of Boetta's dress shirts, her hair loose around her shoulders, while he had abandoned his usual tie and rolled up his sleeves. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, picking at her pad thai, "if we're too different to make this work long-term?" Boetta was quiet for a moment. his analytical mind processing the question. "I used to," he admitted. "But then I realized something. In programming, the most robust systems are often built on seemingly contradictory elements working in harmony. Maybe we're not too different. Maybe we're just complex enough to create something extraordinary." Avalise smiled, reaching for his hand across the candle-lit table. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, Mr. Dippenar, even if you did use a programming metaphor." Their laughter mingled with the distant sounds of the city, rising up into the star-strewn sky. Below them, Washington, D.C. continued its eternal dance of power and politics, of art and commerce, of dreams being built and broken and built again. But in their penthouse sanctuary, they had created their own world, a place where spreadsheets could inspire paintings, where spontaneity and planning could coexist, where love could bridge the gap between two different ways of seeing the world. As they fell asleep that night, Avalise's head resting on Boeta's chest, neither could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead. They couldn't know that their greatest test would come not from their differences, but from the very dreams they were building together. But for now, in the quiet of their newlywed life, they were writing their own story, one that proved that sometimes the most beautiful dreams are built not on perfect similarity, but on the exquisite balance of contradiction. The city lights continued to twinkle, casting patterns on their bedroom wall that looked almost like the rain that had brought them together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose between heart and ambition. But tonight, they slept peacefully, two dreamers who had found in each other the perfect canvas for their shared masterpiece. Chapter 4. The First Cracks. Success came to Capital Tech Solutions like a tidal wave, swift and overwhelming. 3 years into their marriage, Boeta Dippenar found himself at the helm of what the Washington Post was calling DC's fastest-rising tech empire. Their modest K Street office had expanded to occupy 3 floors of a gleaming high-rise overlooking the Potomac, the company logo visible from the Kennedy Center's terrace. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Avalise woke to an empty bed, the sheets on Boeta's side long cold. His text message, sent at 4 a.m., explained he'd gone to the office early to prepare for a crucial meeting with Silicon Valley investors. She traced her fingers over his pillow, remembering when their mornings used to begin with shared coffee and quiet conversation. The penthouse that had once been their sanctuary had subtly transformed. Boeta's home office, previously a casual workspace, now resembled a corporate command center. Multiple monitors displaying real-time market data, a dedicated line for international calls, and a small conference setup for emergency virtual meetings. The wall that had once hosted one of Avalise's favorite paintings now held a massive touchscreen displaying company metrics. Avalise stood in her studio, morning light streaming through the windows, but her canvas remained blank. The space that had once been her refuge felt different now, tainted by the constant intrusion of corporate life. Even here, she could hear the muted chime of Boeta's messages echoing from his office, a digital rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their lives. She thought back to their last real conversation 3 days ago. She'd planned a surprise dinner at their favorite bistro in Georgetown, the place where they'd celebrated their engagement. Boeta had arrived an hour late, his attention divided between their table and his phone, where a crisis in the Asian markets demanded his constant attention. "I'm sorry," he'd said for the 4th time that evening, responding to another urgent email. "The Singapore office is launching a new platform, and the timing has to be perfect." "When isn't the timing crucial?" Avalise had asked, pushing her untouched souffle around the plate. "When isn't? They're a crisis that needs your immediate attention." "This is different," he'd insisted, his fingers flying over the phone's keyboard. "We're on the verge of something extraordinary, Avalise. The company is about to make the jump from regional success to global player. Everything we've worked for is coming together." "Everything you've worked for," she'd corrected quietly, but he was too absorbed in his phone to notice the distinction. Now, standing in her studio 3 days later, Avalee faced her empty canvas with a heavy heart. Her own career was flourishing. Her innovative approaches to curation had earned her recognition across the art world. The National Portrait Gallery had given her unprecedented freedom to shape their upcoming exhibitions, yet success tasted bitter when she couldn't share it with the man she loved. The sound of the front door opening pulled her from her thoughts. Boetta strode in, his bespoke suit immaculate despite the early hour, his manner radiating the focused energy that had become his constant state. "You're home," Avalee said, surprised. It wasn't even noon. "Just for a moment," he replied, heading straight for his office. "I forgot the Singapore proposal files on my desk. The investors' meeting got moved up and I need—" He stopped abruptly, finally noticing the collection of paintings leaning against the wall of Avalee's studio. "What are these?" "My new series," she said softly. "The one I've been working on for the past 3 months. The one I told you about last week." He stared at the paintings, and for a moment, Avalee saw a flicker of the man who had danced with her in the rain. The canvases told their story, a series of abstract pieces that captured the evolution of their relationship. The first was full of joy and movement, all bright colors and dynamic strokes. Each subsequent piece grew more structured, more confined, until the final canvas showed a riot of color trapped within rigid geometric patterns. "They're intense," he said finally, his phone buzzing in his pocket. "We should talk about them over dinner. I'll try to be home by 8, Avalee supplied. 9? 10? Or will you text at midnight to say you're still at the office?" The edge in her voice made him pause. "What's that supposed to mean?" "When was the last time we had dinner together, Boetta? When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't interrupted by your phone?" "You knew what you were getting into," he said, his tone sharpening. "You knew I was building something important. The company needs me right now." "And what about what I need?" The words came out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like smoke. His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. Boetta glanced at it, his expression tightening. "The investors are waiting. We'll talk about this tonight." "Will we?" Avalee challenged. "Or will you come home at midnight, too exhausted to do anything but check your emails one last time before falling asleep?" "That's not fair," he said, but his hand was already reaching for his briefcase. "This is temporary. Once we secure this round of funding—" "It's always temporary," Avalee interrupted. "There's always another deal, another crisis, another reason why your company needs you more than your marriage." The words hit him like physical blows, but his phone was buzzing again, and years of corporate discipline had trained him too well. "I have to go," he said, already moving toward the door. "We'll figure this out tonight, I promise." Avalee watched him leave, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. When she heard the front door close, she turned back to her blank canvas, picking up a brush. Her hand trembled slightly as she made the first stroke, a hard black line cutting across the white surface. The day stretched on, the city outside their windows going about its usual business. Avalee painted with a fury she hadn't felt in years, her emotions pouring onto the canvas in harsh strokes and discordant colors. By late afternoon, she had created something raw and painful, a visual representation of the distance growing between them. Evening came, and with it the expected text, "Meeting running late, don't wait up." Avalee stood on their balcony, looking out over the city they'd both fallen in love with. Washington, D.C. glittered below, monuments lit up like beacons in the darkness. Somewhere in one of those gleaming office towers, her husband was building his empire, one missed dinner at a time. She thought about the early days of their marriage, when they'd found such beautiful balance between his structure and her spontaneity. She remembered lazy Sunday mornings and impromptu dance sessions in their kitchen. She thought about the way Boetta used to look at her, not as an interruption to his schedule, but as the most important appointment of his day. Her phone lit up with another text from him. Big breakthrough with investors, celebrating at Capitol Grill. See you later. Avalee looked at their wedding photo, prominently displayed in the living room. They looked so young, so certain that love would be enough to bridge any gap. Now, 3 years later, she wondered if they'd been naive. Perhaps some dreams were incompatible. Perhaps you couldn't build an empire without sacrificing something equally precious. She walked back into her studio, staring at the series of paintings that documented their relationship's slow transformation. The final canvas, still wet from today's emotional outburst, seemed to mock her with its stark depiction of their reality. Outside, a summer storm was brewing, lightning illuminating the city in brief, brilliant flashes. Avalee remembered another storm, 3 years ago, when they danced on the National Mall without a care in the world. The memory brought tears to her eyes, and she let them fall, watching as they mixed with the paint on her palette. The first cracks in their perfect world were spreading, subtle but undeniable. Like hairline fractures in a masterpiece, they threatened the very foundation of what Boetta and Avalee had built together. The question was no longer if they would need to address these cracks, but whether they would do so before the entire structure crumbled around them. As midnight approached, Avalee lay awake in their bed, listening to the storm rage outside. When Boetta finally came home, his footsteps quiet in the darkened apartment, she pretended to be asleep. She felt him pause in the doorway of their bedroom, perhaps watching her, perhaps thinking about their argument. Then came the familiar sound of his phone vibrating, and moments later, the soft click of his home office door closing. The night stretched on, filled with the sound of rain against windows and the distant murmur of Boetta's voice as he conducted yet another international call. In the darkness, Avalee opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling as lightning illuminated the room in stark bursts of clarity. Each flash revealed another truth she'd been trying to ignore: that success had costs, that love wasn't always enough, that sometimes the hardest choices came disguised as simple questions of priority. Tomorrow would bring another day of missed connections and parallel lives lived under the same roof. But tonight, in the storm-dark hours of early morning, the first real cracks in their foundation were no longer possible to ignore. The only question was whether they would find a way to repair them before everything they'd built together came crashing down around them. Chapter 5. The Fading Canvas. In the soft light of dawn, Avalee Charm-Dipanar stood in her studio, surrounded by the physical manifestations of her fading marriage. The once vibrant space felt different now. Her canvases had taken on darker tones, her brushstrokes grown more aggressive, the colors muting themselves as if in sympathy with her heart's quiet breaking. The summer heat had settled over Washington, D.C. like a heavy blanket, but inside their penthouse, a different kind of warmth was missing. Avalee had spent the past month trying everything she could think of to bridge the growing distance between herself and Boetta. Each attempt felt like throwing pebbles into an ever-widening canyon, hoping one might somehow build a bridge. Her first strategy had been surprise lunches at his office. She would arrive with carefully packed meals from his favorite places: Ethiopian from Churcha, sushi from Nobu, comfort food from Old Ebbitt Grill. But more often than not, she found herself eating alone in his pristine office while he attended emergency video calls. Her presence reduced to a distraction he had to apologize for to his colleagues. "I'm sorry," he'd say, covering his microphone between meetings. "The Tokyo market just opened, and there's a situation we need to handle." The food would grow cold, and eventually Avalee would leave the untouched containers on his desk, each one a small monument to another failed connection. She tried scheduling weekend getaways, careful to book them months in advance, marking them in his calendar with the same bold priority as his board meetings. She found a beautiful bed and breakfast in Virginia's wine country, just an hour from D.C., but worlds away from the corporate chaos. Boetta had seemed excited when she first told him, actually looking up from his phone long enough to smile at the brochures she'd collected. But the morning they were supposed to leave, his assistant called. A major potential investor was in town unexpectedly, and wouldn't it be better to reschedule just this once? Averly cancelled the reservation, adding it to the growing list of just this once disappointments that were becoming their new normal. Even their home felt like it was conspiring against her efforts. She had tried to maintain their shared spaces as neutral territory, free from the encroachment of their professional lives. But Boetta's work had a way of spreading, like an invasive species claiming new territory. Monitors appeared on kitchen counters, conference calls echoed from the bathroom, and their bedroom had become a satellite office for early morning meetings with Asian markets. One particularly humid evening, Averly decided to transform their rooftop terrace into a romantic dinner venue. She spent hours setting up string lights, arranging flowers, and preparing Boetta's favorite South African dishes. A taste of home to remind him of simpler times. She even wore the marigold dress that had caught his eye that first morning at Georgetown. He was only 2 hours late. When he finally arrived, his tie loosened and his eyes glazed with exhaustion. He managed a genuine smile at her efforts. For a moment, Averly saw a glimpse of the man who had danced with her in the rain. But before they'd finished their appetizers, his phone lit up with that now familiar urgency. "It's the West Coast team," he said, already standing. "They're having issues with the new platform launch. I'll just be a minute." That minute stretched into an hour, then 2. By the time he returned, the food was cold, the candles had burned low, and Averly was sitting alone in the dark, watching the city lights blur through unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he said, and she could hear that he meant it. "Let me make it up to you. This weekend—" "Don't," she interrupted softly. "Don't make promises we both know you won't keep." Her next attempt was more calculated, designed to speak his language. She created a detailed presentation, complete with charts and graphs, showing the steady decline in their time together. She mapped their conversations, their shared meals, their intimate moments, watching the trend lines fall month after month. She even included projected scenarios, demonstrating where their relationship would be in 6 months if nothing changed. Boetta had sat through her presentation with the same focused attention he gave his board meetings. He asked thoughtful questions, made notes, and seemed genuinely concerned by the data. For a moment, Averly felt hope flutter in her chest. "You're right," he said finally. "We need to be more efficient with our time together. I'll have my assistant block out specific hours for us each week." She wanted to scream that efficiency wasn't the point, that love couldn't be scheduled like a quarterly review, that she needed her husband, not another appointment in his calendar. Instead, she watched as he created a recurring calendar event titled Quality Time with Averly, and tried to ignore how wrong it felt to see their marriage reduced to a time slot between investor calls. The art world offered no escape from her personal pain. Her work at the National Portrait Gallery, once a source of pure joy, now felt heavy with irony. She spent her days curating other people's stories of love and loss, arranging pieces that spoke of passion and connection, all while her own love story was fading like an improperly preserved masterpiece. Her latest exhibition, titled Connections, had opened to critical acclaim. The Washington Post praised her innovative approach to showing how human relationships evolved in the digital age. During the opening reception, surrounded by DC's cultural elite, Averly stood before a powerful piece showing 2 figures gradually dissolving into pixels and data streams. "It's a striking commentary on modern relationships," a prominent critic told her. "The way technology both connects and separates us. Very powerful." Averly smiled politely, wondering if anyone could see that the piece wasn't commentary. It was confession. Boetta had promised to attend the opening, but a video call with European investors ran long. He sent flowers instead, the card signed by his assistant. That night, alone in her studio, Avalie began a new painting. She worked until dawn, pouring her grief and frustration onto the canvas. The result was unlike anything she'd created before, a massive piece dominated by a central figure that seemed to be simultaneously reaching for and pulling away from a world of harsh digital angles and cold corporate blues. When Boetta passed through the studio the next morning, coffee in one hand and phone in the other, he paused briefly before the new work. "That's different," he said, frowning slightly. "It's very emotional." "That's the point," Avalie replied, but he was already walking away, responding to another urgent email. She tried one last time to reach him through art, creating a series of small, intimate pieces that told the story of their relationship. She hung them throughout their apartment, in his office, the kitchen, the bedroom, hoping they might serve as reminders of what they were losing. The first piece showed their meeting at Georgetown, all warm colors and dynamic energy. The second captured their dance in the rain, with loose, joyful brushstrokes that almost seemed to move on the canvas. Then came their wedding day, their early married life, each moment preserved in paint and memory. The final piece in the series hung in their bedroom, a small canvas dominated by a single figure, standing before a bank of screens, their back turned to an empty bed. She waited for Boetta to notice, to comment, to understand what she was trying to tell him through her art. A week passed, then two. The paintings became part of the background noise of their lives, as ignored as Avalie herself felt. She watched him walk past them day after day, his attention forever fixed on the glowing screen in his hand, and realized that some messages couldn't be conveyed through art alone. One night, as another summer storm raged outside their windows, Avalie sat in her studio surrounded by the physical evidence of her failed attempts to save their marriage. Each canvas told a story of hope gradually fading, of love being slowly suffocated by ambition and distance. She picked up a brush, dipping it in the darkest blue on her palette. On a fresh canvas, she began to paint what she feared would be the final chapter of their story, a piece she hoped would never need to be displayed. As lightning illuminated the DC skyline, Avalie worked through the night, her brushstrokes capturing the moment when trying becomes too painful to continue. The finished piece showed two paths diverging, one leading toward a bright but cold world of success and achievement, the other winding toward an uncertain but more human future. In the middle, two figures stood back to back, their shadows stretching in opposite directions. As dawn broke over the capital, Avalie stepped back from the canvas, her heart heavy with the weight of decisions yet to be made. She could hear Boetta in his office, his voice carrying through the walls as he conducted another early morning call. The sound was so familiar now, as much a part of their home as the art on the walls or the memories in the halls. She looked at her phone, at the dozens of calendar invites titled "Quality Time with Avalie" that had been cancelled or rescheduled. Each one represented another small surrender, another moment when his empire had taken precedence over their love. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the city fresh and clean in the morning light. The Washington Monument stood tall against the clearing sky, a silent witness to countless stories of love and loss, of dreams achieved and dreams abandoned. Avalie touched the final painting, her fingers tracing the diverging paths. She knew with a clarity that felt like both revelation and defeat that they were approaching their own divergence. The only question was whether Boetta would notice before it was too late, whether he would look up from his screens and spreadsheets long enough to see that their canvas was fading, their masterpiece being painted over with the cold colors of corporate success. As if in answer to her unspoken question, his phone rang again, its sound echoing through their beautiful empty home like a bell tolling the hour. Avali closed her eyes, letting her hand fall from the canvas, and began to plan what would become their last night together. Chapter 6. The Breaking Point. The argument that would change everything began on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday in September. Washington, D.C. was caught in that peculiar moment between summer and fall, the air thick with humidity and unfulfilled promises. The sun was setting behind the Capitol dome, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that would have once inspired Avali to reach for her brushes. Instead, she stood in their penthouse kitchen, staring at her phone and the message that had finally pushed her to the edge. Running late, big news about Singapore expansion, don't wait up. B. It wasn't the message itself. She'd received hundreds like it over the past years. It wasn't even that today was their anniversary, though the dozen roses wilting in their vase on the counter, ordered by his assistant, delivered with a generic card, added a particular sting to his absence. No, what broke her was the realization that she wasn't even surprised anymore. The day had started with such hope. Avali had woken early, her mind filled with memories of their first meeting at Georgetown, of dancing in the rain, of all the moments that had led them here. She'd spent weeks planning this evening, determined to make one last attempt to reach the man she'd fallen in love with. She'd called in favors to reserve the entire rooftop at the Kennedy Center, had arranged for the same jazz quartet that had played at their wedding to perform, had even tracked down the exact Ethiopian coffee beans from the cafe where they'd first met. The table was set with their wedding china, candles waiting to be lit, a bottle of South African wine breathing in the corner, all of it now useless. Avali moved through their apartment, each room a museum of their fading love. In his home office, she paused before the wall of achievements, magazine covers celebrating Boeta's success, awards recognizing his innovation, framed articles praising his business acumen. In the center hung the Fortune magazine cover that had marked the beginning of the end. Boeta Dipanar, DC's tech revolutionary. The article had praised his single-minded dedication to success, not knowing the personal cost of that dedication. Her studio, once her sanctuary, felt more like a confessional now. Her recent works lined the walls, each canvas documenting their relationship's slow dissolution in shades of blue and grey. The latest piece, still unfinished on her easel, showed a woman dissolving into pixels, her form scattered by a digital wind. The sound of keys in the door pulled her from her thoughts. Boeta entered, his excitement palpable even from across the room. His suit was impeccable despite the late hour, his eyes bright with the fever of success. "Avali, you won't believe what just happened. The Singapore team—" He stopped abruptly, finally noticing the elegant dress she wore, the carefully set table, the now cold dinner. "Oh God, the anniversary dinner. I completely forgot?" Avali supplied, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "No, you didn't forget. Your assistant reminded you this morning. I saw the calendar alert on your phone. You chose to miss it." "That's not fair," Boeta protested, dropping his briefcase on the counter. "This meeting was crucial. We're about to expand into Southeast Asia, I know. Just like last month's crucial meeting was about expanding into Europe. And next month there'll be another market, another opportunity, another reason why your company needs you more than your marriage." "The company doesn't need me more than our marriage," he argued, but his hand was already reaching for his buzzing phone. "It's just a demanding phase. Once we secure this expansion—" "Don't." Avali's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Don't you dare say this is temporary. Nothing about this is temporary. This is who you've chosen to become." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 3 years of accumulated pain. Boeta's phone continued to buzz, but for once he didn't immediately answer it. What do you want from me, Avalee? I'm building something important here. Something that could change the way the whole world does business. You knew who I was when you married me. Did I? She moved to the window, looking out at the city they'd both loved. I married a man who danced with me in the rain, who saw beauty in spontaneity, who understood that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. I'm still that man, Boetta insisted, but his phone was in his hand again, screen glowing with urgent messages. Are you? Avalee turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time in months. When was the last time you looked at one of my paintings? Really looked, not just glanced at them between calls. When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't interrupted by your phone? When was the last time you chose me over your company? That's not fair, he repeated, but the words sounded hollow even to him. I'm not choosing the company over you. I'm choosing our future. Everything I'm building for us. No, Avalee said softly, the truth of it breaking her heart. You're building it for yourself. I'm just the wife in your biography, the supportive character in your success story. I'm not competing with your business, Boetta. I'm asking you to remember we're partners. His response cut through her like Arctic wind. The company needs me more right now. You need to understand that. The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted in the air between them. Avalee felt it like a physical change, as if the last thread holding their marriage together had finally snapped. I understand perfectly, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I understand that I've been fighting for a marriage by myself. I understand that your empire means more to you than our love. I understand that the man I married is gone, replaced by someone who measures everything, even love, in profit margins and market shares. That's not... His phone rang, the sound cutting through his protest. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. It's Singapore. I have to take this. Avalee watched as he walked to his office, already speaking rapidly into the phone. The door closed behind him, leaving her alone with the cooling dinner, the wilting roses, and the realization that she'd been alone for much longer than just this evening. She moved through their apartment like a ghost, touching things that had once meant so much, photos from happier days, art they'd bought together, small mementos of their love story. In their bedroom, she opened her closet, pulling out the red dress she'd been saving for a special occasion. The fabric felt like liquid fire in her hands, a last flame of hope in the dying light of their marriage. Outside, the city continued its eternal dance of power and ambition. Lights flickered on in office buildings, other dedicated souls working late into the night. From Boetta's office came the muted sound of his voice, animated and engaged in a way he rarely was with her anymore. Avalee stood in her studio, surrounded by the evidence of their failing love. Each canvas told a story of hope fading, of love being suffocated by ambition, of two people growing apart despite sharing the same space. She picked up a brush, dipping it in deep crimson paint. On a fresh canvas, she began to paint what she knew would be her last work in this studio. As the night deepened around her, she poured everything into the piece. Their first meeting, their dance in the rain, their wedding day, and all the small moments that had made their love special. But she also painted the distance that had grown between them, the coldness that had replaced their warmth, the technology that had become his true partner. Hours passed. From his office, Boetta's voice rose and fell like a tide, discussing profits and projections, expansions and acquisitions. Not once did he check on her. Not once did he remember that this was supposed to be their anniversary celebration. As dawn began to paint the sky in shades of hope she no longer felt, Avalee put the final touches on her painting. It showed two figures, one dissolving into streams of data and digital code, the other remaining stubbornly, painfully human. Between them stretched an unbridgeable void, filled with all the words they'd never said and the moments they'd never share. She heard Boetta's office door open, his footsteps moving toward their bedroom. No doubt he would collapse into bed for a few hours before starting the cycle again. Her decision crystallized in that moment, clear and sharp as morning light on the Potomac. Taking out her phone, she typed a simple message. I need one last night. Meet me at your office tomorrow evening. Wear the suit you wore when we first met. The response came quickly, probably the fastest he'd replied to her in months. Of course, everything okay? She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at her final painting still wet on the easel. Tomorrow, she would make one last attempt to reach him, not to save their marriage. She knew now that it was too late for that, but to remind him and herself of the love they'd once shared. One last dance. One last chance to say goodbye to the man she'd married before he completely disappeared into the empire he'd built. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., its light catching the windows of countless office buildings where other marriages were probably dissolving in the name of success. Avalie touched her painting one last time, her fingers leaving a single crimson print on the canvas. It looked like a wound, or perhaps a heartbreaking. In their bedroom, Boetta was already asleep, his phone clutched in his hand like a lover. Avalie watched him for a moment, remembering all the mornings she'd woken to his smile, all the lazy Sundays they'd spent planning their future. She wondered when exactly they'd lost their way, when his dreams had become more important than their reality. Tomorrow would bring its own pain, its own decisions, its own goodbyes. But for now, in the quiet of early morning, Avalie allowed herself to mourn for what they'd had, for what they'd lost, and for what they might have been if love had been enough to bridge the gap between ambition and heart. Chapter 7. The Last Night. Avalie stood before the mirror in their Adams Morgan apartment, the red dress flowing around her like liquid flame. She had purchased it months ago, saving it for a special occasion that never came. Now it would serve a different purpose, not a celebration, but a farewell. Her fingers traced the silk, remembering how Boetta used to touch her with that same delicate attention before spreadsheets and market shares consumed his world. The afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across their bedroom. She had spent the day preparing not just her appearance, but her heart. Each room held memories she needed to preserve, their first morning together in this kitchen, lazy Sundays reading in the living room, passionate nights and gentle mornings in their bed. She photographed each space with her artist's eye, storing them away like precious gems. In her studio, she had finished one last painting, not the dark, angry pieces of recent months, but something that captured the essence of their love story. It showed two figures dancing in the rain, their forms slightly blurred, suggesting movement and joy. Behind them rose the Washington Monument, its reflection rippling in the wet pavement of the National Mall. She would leave it for him to find, her final gift. The sun was setting over D.C. when she arrived at his office building, the glass and steel structure catching the dying light like amber. The security guard recognized her, though it had been months since her last attempt at a surprise lunch visit, and waved her through with a sympathetic smile. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to another world. Each floor marked the stages of Capital Tech's growth, from their first small office on the 3rd floor to the expanding team on the 8th, to now, where Boetta occupied the entire top floor. The soft ding announcing her arrival echoed through her chest like a bell tolling. Boetta's assistant Jennifer looked up in surprise as Avalie stepped out of the elevator. "Mrs. Charm Dippenar, I didn't know you were expected. Mr. Dippenar is on a call with—" "It's all right, Jennifer," Avalie interrupted gently. "He's expecting me." She paused, then added softly, "Thank you for everything." For all the times you tried to help us find time together." Something in her tone made Jennifer's eyes widen slightly. The assistant opened her mouth as if to speak, then simply nodded, understanding passing between the women like a current. Avalee walked the familiar path to Boetta's corner office, her heels clicking against the marble floors. Through the glass walls, she could see him pacing, phone to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. Even now she couldn't help but admire his passion, the intense focus that had first attracted her to him. He saw her through the glass and froze mid-sentence. For a moment, time seemed to stop as he took in her appearance. The red dress, her hair arranged in the same style she'd worn the day they met, her eyes holding all the words they'd never said. She saw him quickly end his call, something he'd rarely done for her in recent years. "Avalee," he breathed as she entered the office. "You look incredible." "Thank you," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "You're wearing the suit, the one from Georgetown." He nodded, adjusting his tie self-consciously. The charcoal grey suit still fit him perfectly, though his shoulders seemed to carry more weight now. "I had it cleaned specially. When you asked for tonight, I thought—" "Dance with me?" she interrupted, holding out her hand just as she had that rainy day on the mall. His phone buzzed on his desk. For the first time in years, he didn't even glance at it. Instead, he stepped forward, taking her hand in his. The contact sent electricity through them both, memories of countless touches rising to the surface like bubbles in champagne. Avalee pulled out her phone, starting the playlist she'd prepared. The soft notes of their wedding song filled the office, competing with the gentle hum of servers and distant traffic below. She guided his hand to her waist, stepping close enough to catch his familiar scent, expensive cologne mingled with coffee and ambition. They began to move together, muscle memory taking over as they swayed to the music. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out before them, a tapestry of lights twinkling like earthbound stars. The Washington Monument stood in the distance, illuminated against the night sky, a silent witness to their final dance. "Do you remember," Avalee murmured against his chest, "when we used to dance in the kitchen while making dinner?" "Every Sunday," Boetta replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You'd put on that old jazz station, and we'd burn the food because we couldn't stop dancing." When did we stop? The question hung between them like smoke, heavy with implications. Boetta's hand tightened on her waist. "I don't know," he admitted. "Somewhere between the Series B funding and the European expansion. One day we just stopped." Avalee pulled back slightly, meeting his eyes. "Do you remember what you said to me the day we met? About why you started this company?" "I wanted to change the world," he said slowly, "to create something that would make a difference." "No," she corrected gently. "You said you wanted to build something that would give us the freedom to live life on our own terms. Somewhere along the way, the building became more important than the living." The music shifted to another song, the one that had been playing in the cafe when they first met. Boetta's steps faltered slightly as recognition hit him. "You planned all this," he said, not accusingly, but with a note of wonder. "The suit, the music, the memories." "Consider it my final curation," Avalee said, a sad smile playing at her lips. "One last exhibit of what we were, what we had, what we lost." "We haven't lost anything," Boetta protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're just going through a rough patch. Once the Singapore deal is complete, there will be another deal," she interrupted. "Another expansion, another crisis, another reason why the company needs you more than our marriage. And that's okay." "How can you say that's okay?" "Because I finally understand," Avalee said, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "This is who you are now. The man who danced with me in the rain, who saw beauty in chaos, who valued moments over metrics." He's gone. And the woman who could be satisfied with leftovers and calendar invites, who could compete with spreadsheets for attention, who could watch her art die slowly in the shadow of your success. She never existed. Avalee, please. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything into it. Their first meeting, their rainy dance, their wedding day, every moment of joy and pain that had led them here. When she pulled away, there were tears in both their eyes. "Make love to me," she whispered. "One last time. Let's remember why we fell in love, before we say goodbye." Later, much later, as they lay tangled together on the office couch, the city lights painting patterns on their skin, Avalee traced the worried lines that had formed around Boetta's eyes in recent years. "You're going to change the world," she said softly. "You already are. But I can't watch myself disappear while you do it." "I can change," he started to say, but she placed a finger against his lips. "That's not what I want. Your drive, your ambition, your absolute dedication to your vision, they're part of who you are. I fell in love with that passion. I just can't live in its shadow anymore." As dawn began to paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, Avalee carefully extracted herself from his embrace. She dressed slowly, deliberately, each movement a goodbye to the life they'd built together. Boetta watched her from the couch, his expression a mixture of love, regret, and dawning understanding. "The red dress," he said suddenly. "You bought it months ago. You've been planning this." "Not planning," she corrected, smoothing the silk over her hips. "Preparing. There's a difference." She walked to the window, looking out over the awakening city. The early morning light caught the dome of the capital, making it glow like a second sun. "There's a letter in your desk drawer," she said, not turning around. "Read it when you're ready, not now." "Avalee, thank you," she interrupted, finally facing him, "for the dance, for the memories, for showing me that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to let go of something beautiful to let it become what it needs to be." She crossed the office one last time, pausing at the door. "Your phone's been buzzing for the past hour. Singapore's probably awake. You should get back to work." Before he could respond, she was gone, her perfume lingering in the air like a ghost. Through the glass walls, he watched her walk to the elevator, her red dress aflame against the corporate greys and blacks. She didn't look back. Alone in his office, surrounded by the evidence of his success and the echo of her absence, Boetta Dipanar felt something fundamental shift in his carefully ordered world. His phone buzzed again. Singapore, urgent, demanding immediate attention. For the first time in years, he let it ring. The sun rose over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in colors that would have made Avalee reach for her brushes. In the growing light, a red dress moved through the city streets like a wound, or a heart breaking, or perhaps both. Behind her, in a glass tower filled with dreams and data, a man sat motionless at his desk, holding an unopened letter while his empire continued to grow in the silence of her absence. Chapter 8. The Letter. The morning sun had fully risen over Washington, D.C. by the time Boetta Dipanar found the strength to reach for the envelope in his desk drawer. His fingers trembled slightly, an unfamiliar sensation for hands that usually moved with such certainty across keyboards and contracts. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored art paper that he recognized from Avalee's studio. His name was written on the front in her distinctive calligraphy, each letter a small work of art. The office around him felt different now, altered by the lingering scent of her perfume and the memory of their last dance. His phone had finally stopped buzzing. Even Singapore, it seemed, had exhausted its urgent demands. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. With careful movements that belied his inner turmoil, Boetta Dipanar Boetta opened the envelope and unfolded the letter within. The paper was handmade. He remembered the day she'd learned to make it, coming home covered in pulp and beaming with pride. Her words flowed across the page like art itself, each sentence a brushstroke painting their story. Dear Boetta, you once told me you loved how I could find beauty in chaos. It was our first morning together. Sunlight streaming through the windows of that tiny Georgetown cafe, and you looked at my sketchbook with such wonder, as if you'd discovered a new way of seeing the world. I fell in love with that look in your eyes, the way you could appreciate art, even though your own world was built on algorithms and spreadsheets. But I can't find beauty in the chaos anymore, not in the endless meetings, the constant calls, the way your empire has consumed our love bite by bite. I've tried, my darling. I've tried to paint our story in different lights, to frame our marriage in ways that might make sense of what we've become, but every canvas tells the same truth. We're no longer creating art together. We're not even in the same gallery anymore. I'm not leaving because I stopped loving you. I'm leaving because I love you enough to know that we're destroying each other by staying together. You need freedom to build your dreams without the weight of my disappointment. I need space to remember who I am without being a footnote in your success story. Do you remember that rainy day on the National Mall? How we danced without music? How the whole world seemed to disappear around us? I've been chasing that feeling for years now, trying to recreate that magic in 1,000 small ways. But you can't choreograph spontaneity. You can't schedule joy. You can't measure love in market shares and quarterly reports. In my studio, you'll find one last painting. It's not a goodbye. It's a memory captured in colors and shapes that only you will truly understand. Keep it, sell it, store it away. But know that it holds the truth of what we were, what we could have been in another life where timing and dreams aligned differently. I've left your ring on my easel, not because I regret wearing it, but because some masterpieces are meant to remain unfinished. Some loves are meant to be chapters rather than complete stories. You taught me about efficiency, about the beauty of well-planned execution, so I'm making the most efficient choice. I'm setting us both free while we still have enough love left to remember why we began. Don't try to find me. Sometimes love means letting go, and I need to learn who I am in a world that isn't defined by your success or shadowed by your dreams. I've accepted a curator position abroad. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't worry about the apartment or our shared accounts. My lawyer will contact yours with everything you need. I want you to know that I'm proud of you, proud of the empire you've built, the lives you've changed, the world you're reshaping. You're going to be exactly who you've always wanted to be, the visionary, the innovator, the man who changed the way the world does business. I just can't be the woman who watches her own dreams fade while yours take flight. You'll wonder if there was something you could have done differently. There wasn't. We were two artists working in different mediums, you with technology and markets, me with paint and canvas. For a while, we created something beautiful together, but art can't survive in a vacuum, and I've been suffocating in the shadow of your success. Take care of yourself, my love. Remember to look up from your screen sometimes. Remember that success isn't just measured in stock prices and market penetration. Remember that once, on a rainy day in our nation's capital, you danced with a girl who saw beauty in chaos. And for a moment, you saw it too. I'll carry the memory of that moment with me always. It will be my masterpiece, the perfect capturing of love before reality added its harsh brushstrokes. Be magnificent, be powerful, be everything you've dreamed of being. But please, don't look for me. Some paintings are meant to be appreciated from a distance, and some loves are meant to live in memory rather than reality. Always, Avalie P.S. I've left you one last gift. A series of small paintings hidden throughout your office. Each one captures a moment from our time together. Find them when you need to remember that once, You knew how to dance in the rain. Boeta read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of meaning, new depths of pain and love. His hands shook as he set it down on his desk, the morning light catching the tears that had fallen on the handmade paper. With newfound awareness, he began to look around his office. Really look for the first time in years. In corners he'd never noticed, behind awards he'd stopped seeing, he found them. Tiny canvases, each one a window into their past. A miniature of the Georgetown cafe where they'd met. A watercolor of their first apartment, an abstract piece that somehow captured the exact shade of dawn on their wedding day. He found himself moving through his office like a man in a dream, discovering these small treasures she'd hidden away. Each painting was dated, he realized. She'd been placing them here for months, preparing for this goodbye in her own artistic way. The last one he found was behind his computer monitors. A small, perfect capturing of their last dance together, painted in the hours before she'd arrived in her red dress. The figures in the painting were wrapped in light, their forms suggesting both intimacy and farewell. His phone buzzed again. Singapore again. The world of business continued its relentless march forward, but for the first time in years, Boeta Dipanar let the call go unanswered. Instead, he walked to his window, looking out over the city that had witnessed their love story. The Washington Monument rose in the distance, its reflection rippling in the Potomac. Somewhere out there, a woman in a red dress was leaving the city they'd both loved, carrying with her the colors that had made his world vibrant. He pressed his hand against the glass, remembering how she used to trace the cityscape with her fingers, finding beauty in the geometric patterns of urban life. His empire stretched out below him, the gleaming offices, the humming servers, the endless stream of data that had become his true companion. But standing there in the morning light, surrounded by the small paintings that told their story, Boeta realized that success tasted like ashes when there was no one to share it with. The letter lay on his desk, its pages slightly curved from his grip, the ink smudged in places by tears he hadn't realized he was shedding. In the corner of his office, a small security camera blinked steadily, recording the moment when one of DC's most powerful men learned that some things couldn't be measured in profit margins or market shares. Outside, the city was awakening to another day of political power plays and corporate machinations. But in a top-floor office overlooking the Potomac, time stood still as a man surrounded by success finally understood the cost of achieving it. The morning sun caught the tears on his cheeks, turning them to gold, as if even his grief was being transformed into a commodity. His phone buzzed one final time, then fell silent. In the quiet, Boeta could almost hear the echo of their last dance, could almost smell her perfume, could almost believe that if he turned around quickly enough, she would still be there in her red dress, ready to teach him again how to find beauty in chaos. But when he turned, there was only the empty office, the letter, and the small paintings that would become his most valuable possessions, worth more than all the stock options and market shares in his empire of data and dreams. Chapter 9. The Search. The autumn chill had settled over Washington, D.C., painting the city in shades of gold and crimson that reminded Boeta of Avali's last dress. 2 weeks had passed since she'd left, and his empire felt hollow without her. The penthouse, once their sanctuary, now echoed with absence, her paintings removed from the walls, her art supplies cleared from the studio, only the faintest trace of her perfume lingering like a ghost. Despite her plea not to look for her, Boeta had thrown himself into the search with the same intensity he usually reserved for corporate acquisitions. He hired the best private investigators in D.C., leveraging his connections in the tech world to track her movements. But Avali, it seemed, had learned something about strategic planning during their years together. Her gallery resignation had been submitted weeks in advance, effective immediately after their last night. Her social media accounts were dormant. Her cell phone number was disconnected. The art shipping company that had moved her supplies refused to disclose the destination, citing client confidentiality. Even her lawyer, a formidable woman in Georgetown, would only communicate through official channels about their divorce proceedings. Boetta sat in his office, surrounded by the small paintings she'd hidden for him to find. He'd had them professionally framed, each one a window into the happiness he'd taken for granted. His computer displayed multiple search windows, flight manifests, hotel bookings, gallery openings around the world. Somewhere out there, Avali was starting a new life, and for the first time, his technological empire felt useless in the face of her determination to disappear. He reached out to their mutual friends, starting with those from their early days at Georgetown. Most seemed unsurprised by their separation, which stung more than he expected. Some, like Marcus from the gallery circuit, were politely evasive, suggesting they'd been prepared for this outcome. "I'm worried about her," Boetta told Marcus over coffee at their old Georgetown cafe. The Ethiopian blend they'd once shared now tasted bitter on his tongue. "Are you?" Marcus asked, studying him over the rim of his cup. "Or are you worried about yourself, about losing control of a situation for the first time in your life?" The question hit too close to home. Boetta had spent the past 2 weeks oscillating between grief and frustration. Unused to problems he couldn't solve with money or technology, his corporate efficiency had been replaced by a frantic energy that concerned even his most dedicated employees. He visited every place in D.C. that held significance in their relationship. The spot on the National Mall where they danced in the rain was now occupied by tourists taking photos of the monuments. The Jefferson Memorial, where they'd exchanged vows, stood serene and indifferent to his pain. Even their favorite Eastern Market breakfast spot felt different without her artistic eye finding beauty in the mundane details. The search became an obsession. He hired more investigators, expanded the search internationally. His assistant Jennifer watched with growing concern as he pushed aside crucial business meetings to pursue another possible lead. The Singapore expansion, once his primary focus, now felt insignificant compared to finding the woman who had brought color to his world. 1 month into the search, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A junior curator at the National Portrait Gallery, reviewing archived security footage for a different project, noticed Avali in the background of a frame. The timestamp showed her entering the conservation department 3 days before their last night together. Boetta practically ran to the gallery, his usual composed demeanor forgotten in his eagerness for any connection to her. The conservation department was basement level, a maze of climate-controlled rooms where art was restored and preserved. The head conservator, an elderly woman named Dr. Chen, regarded him with a mixture of sympathy and caution. "Yes, she was here," Dr. Chen confirmed, leading him through the quiet workspace. She wanted to learn about art preservation techniques, said something about ensuring certain pieces would survive for future generations. They stopped before a workstation where, Dr. Chen explained, Avali had spent several hours studying the effects of time and environment on various materials. She was particularly interested in how different pigments age, the conservator added, how some colors fade while others endure. The metaphor wasn't lost on Boetta. He could almost see her here, absorbing knowledge about preservation while planning their final goodbye. Had she been thinking about how to preserve their memories, even as she prepared to leave? How to ensure their love story would endure, even as their marriage faded? His next lead came from a chance encounter at the Kennedy Center. The jazz quartet that had played at their wedding was performing, and Boetta attended on a whim, torturing himself with memories of happier times. After the performance, the saxophone player recognized him. "Mr. Dippenar," the musician called out, "I've been meaning to contact you. Ms. Charm asked us to give you something, but only after sufficient time had passed." The envelope he handed over contained a single sheet of Avalie's handmade paper. On it, she had painted a small scene of their first dance as husband and wife. Below the image, she had written, "Some music plays on even when the dance has ended." The search continued, becoming more refined as Boeta learned to think like an artist rather than a tech mogul. He began visiting galleries in other cities, studying exhibition schedules, looking for her distinctive curatorial style. He learned about the international art scene, about how curators move between institutions, about the network of relationships that govern the art world. Their mutual friend Themba finally broke down after 2 months of Boeta's persistent questioning. Over drinks at the old Ebbet Grill, he revealed a crucial piece of information. She took a curator position abroad. That's all I can say. She made me promise. The confirmation that she had left the country sent Boeta into a new phase of searching. He expanded his investigation to major galleries and museums worldwide, looking for new hiring announcements, upcoming exhibitions, anything that might bear her artistic fingerprint. His obsession began to affect Capital Tech. Board members whispered about his distraction, about delayed decisions and missed opportunities. The Singapore expansion, once his dream project, stalled as he devoted more time to his personal search. His empire, built on precision and focus, began to show signs of strain. One evening, alone in their penthouse, Boeta found himself in her former studio. The room still held echoes of her presence. A forgotten paintbrush under the radiator, a smudge of blue paint on the windowsill, the particular way the light fell across the now empty easel. He sat on her paint-stained stool, surrounded by the ghost of their life together. On impulse, he picked up the paintbrush, dipping it in some abandoned paint. On a scrap of paper, he tried to capture how he felt, the way his world had lost its color, the ache of her absence, the desperate need to find her. The result was childish, clumsy, nothing like her masterful works. But the act of creating, of trying to express emotion through art, gave him a new understanding of her world. 3 months into the search, another clue emerged. A gallery owner in New York mentioned seeing one of Avalie's distinctive installations in a Chelsea window. Boeta flew there immediately, hope rising in his chest like a tide. But the gallery owner's description led nowhere. The installation had been temporary, and no one could say where the artist had gone next. Back in D.C., the fall colors faded to winter gray. The city prepared for the holiday season, strings of lights appearing along K Street like stars brought down to earth. Boeta wandered through their old haunts, seeing memories around every corner. The cafe where they'd met had closed, becoming another victim of changing times. The spot where they'd danced in the rain was now under construction, the National Mall's eternal evolution continuing without regard for personal history. His phone buzzed constantly. Business demands, board concerns, the endless needs of his digital empire. But for the first time in his career, Boeta Dipanar wasn't answering. Instead, he sat in art galleries for hours, studying paintings, trying to understand what Avalie had seen in them. He enrolled in a basic art appreciation course at Georgetown, humbling himself to learn the language she had spoken so fluently. The holiday season brought a new kind of pain. Their usual traditions, choosing a tree from the lot near Eastern Market, decorating it with ornaments collected from their travels, sharing mulled wine on their balcony, now existed only in memory. The penthouse remained undecorated, Boeta unable to bear the thought of celebrating without her. 6 months into his search, reality began to set in. Avalie had covered her tracks too well, had planned her departure too carefully. She had learned from him, after all, the importance of strategy, of meticulous execution. But where his plans had always focused on acquisition and growth, hers had centered on preservation and independence. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent years teaching her about efficiency and strategic planning, and she had used those lessons to orchestrate the perfect disappearance. His own methods, turned against him, had proven more effective than he could have imagined. One snowy evening, as he sat in his office surrounded by her hidden paintings, Boetta finally understood what she had meant in her letter. Some loves were meant to live in memory rather than reality. Some paintings were meant to be appreciated from a distance. His search, driven by the same controlling instincts that had driven her away, was perhaps the clearest proof that she had been right to leave. The Singapore expansion moved forward without his constant oversight. Capital Tech continued to grow, its momentum carrying it forward despite his distraction. But Boetta Dipenar, the man who had once measured everything in profit margins and market shares, found himself measuring time differently now. In memories, in moments, in the spaces between heartbeats where love used to live. Winter settled over Washington, D.C., covering the city in a blanket of white that reminded him of blank canvases waiting to be filled. Somewhere in the world, Avalee was creating new art, telling new stories, painting new memories. And here, in the city where their love had bloomed and faded, Boetta learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most powerful act of love was letting go. Chapter 10. The Discovery. 6 months had passed since Avalee's departure, and winter was finally releasing its grip on Washington, D.C. Cherry blossoms were beginning to bud along the tidal basin, promising another season of renewal. Boetta Dipenar stood in his office at Capital Tech, staring out at the city that had witnessed both the rise of his empire and the fall of his marriage. The Singapore expansion was complete, ironically successful despite his reduced involvement. His company had grown, even as his personal life had shrunk to a series of habits and routines that felt more like survival than living. The small paintings Avalee had hidden throughout his office remained his most precious possessions, though he'd stopped actively searching for her weeks ago. That morning had begun like any other. Boetta was in New York for a technology conference, his keynote speech about digital innovation scheduled for the afternoon. He had arrived early, walking through the Chelsea neighborhood to clear his head before the presentation. The gallery windows that lined the streets reflected the morning sun, each one a reminder of Avalee's world. And then he saw it. The painting caught his eye from half a block away, a large canvas dominating a gallery window. Even from a distance, he would have known her work anywhere. The style was unmistakably hers, but it had evolved, grown deeper and more complex. The piece showed the Washington Monument wrapped in cherry blossoms and rain, but with a new perspective that made his heart stop. The scene was viewed from above, as if looking down from their old penthouse, but the monument was reflected in multiple surfaces: office windows, rain puddles, the screens of countless phones held by passing tourists. Each reflection showed a slightly different version of the same scene, some in full color, others reduced to digital pixels and binary code. Boetta stood transfixed, recognizing himself in the cold digital reflections, seeing their entire relationship captured in the interplay between organic beauty and technological precision. A small placard beside the painting announced an upcoming exhibition in Montreal. Digital Rain, New Works by Avalee Charm. His hands shook as he entered the gallery, the familiar scent of oil paint and possibility bringing back a flood of memories. The gallery owner, a sophisticated woman in her 50s, recognized him immediately, not as a tech mogul, but as the subject of the painting. She said someone might come looking, the woman said, studying him with knowing eyes, though I don't think she really believed you would. The exhibition in Montreal, Boetta said, his voice rough with emotion. When? It opens next week, her first solo show. The woman hesitated, then added, She's different now. Stronger. Her work has evolved in remarkable ways. Boetta nodded, understanding the implied warning. The painting. Is it for sale? No, the gallery owner replied. That one's marked private collection. She said it needed to stay here, where paths cross and people find their way back to themselves. Within hours, Boetta had cancelled his conference speech and booked a flight to Montreal. His assistant, Jennifer, rearranged his schedule without comment, though he caught the glimmer of approval in her eyes. 6 months ago, he would have considered such an impulsive action irresponsible. Now it felt like the only logical choice. The flight to Montreal gave him time to think, to process what he'd learned from her painting. She had been watching their old home, perhaps standing on some other rooftop, seeing their life together through new eyes. The multiple reflections suggested she'd gained perspective on their relationship, understanding both its beauty and its digital distortions. Montreal welcomed him with a fresh blanket of late winter snow, the city's blend of old and new architecture, reminding him of Avalie's appreciation for contrasts. The gallery, where her exhibition was being installed, sat in a converted industrial space in the city's trendy Mile End neighborhood. Through the gallery's windows, he could see her directing the installation, her braids now styled differently, her movements confident and purposeful. She wore paint-stained overalls over a cream turtleneck, looking more like the artist she'd always been than the curator's wife she'd tried to become. Boetta watched her work, remembering how she used to move through their home with that same focused grace. She was arranging pieces in a sequence that told a story, their story, he realized, but told from a perspective he'd never considered. Each painting captured a moment of their relationship, transformed through her artistic lens into something universal. There was their first meeting, but painted as a collision of geometric patterns and organic forms. Their dance in the rain appeared as a study in digital precipitation, each droplet containing fragments of code and color. Their wedding day was reimagined as a mesh of traditional imagery and binary sequences. The centerpiece of the exhibition stopped him cold. It was a massive triptych titled Empire of Data, showing their penthouse view of DC at 3 different times of day. In the first panel, sunrise painted the city in hopeful hues. The middle panel showed noon, harsh light revealing the city's ambitions and angles. The final panel depicted night, but instead of darkness, the city glowed with digital light, each window a pixel in an endless display of ones and zeros. He was so absorbed in studying the paintings that he didn't notice the gallery had gone quiet. When he finally turned, Avalie was standing a few feet away, her expression a complex mixture of emotions he'd once known how to read. "You found me," she said softly, not a question, but a statement of fact. "You're painting in Chelsea," he replied. "I would know your work anywhere." She nodded, moving closer to the triptych. "I needed to understand it," she said, gesturing to the paintings. "What happened to us? How we lost each other in your beautiful digital empire. I needed to paint it to make sense of it." "And did you? Make sense of it?" "Some things can't be fully understood," she answered, turning to face him. "They can only be experienced, processed, and eventually accepted. Like rain. You can measure it, analyze its patterns, predict its behavior, but you can't really know it until you've danced in it." The reference to their rain dance made his heart clench. He looked closer at her, seeing new confidence in her posture, new wisdom in her eyes. She had changed just as the gallery owner had warned, but so had he. "I've been learning about art," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "Taking classes at Georgetown. Trying to understand your world the way you tried to understand mine." A small smile played at her lips. "And what have you learned?" "That some things can't be quantified, that success isn't always measurable, that love isn't a resource to be managed, but a masterpiece to be cherished." Avalie's eyes softened slightly. She moved to another painting, one showing a woman emerging from a digital cocoon, her form becoming more vibrant as she broke free from the pixels that had confined her. "This is who I am now," she said, touching the canvas gently. "I'm not running anymore, not hiding. I'm creating something new from what we were, what we lost, what we learned." "I know," Boetta replied. "I can see it in your work. You're stronger now, more fully yourself." He paused, gathering courage. "I've changed too. The company runs itself more now. I've learned to delegate, to step back, to find balance. Because I left. Because you taught me that some things are worth more than empire building. It just took losing you to understand the lesson." Outside the gallery windows, Montreal's winter light painted the snow in shades of gold and rose. Inside, surrounded by the artistic chronicle of their love story, two people who had lost their way stood at a crossroads of possibility. "I'm not coming back to DC," Averly said firmly. "I have a life here now, a community. My work is finally being recognized for what it is, not as an extension of your success." "I know," Boetta nodded. "I'm not asking you to come back. I'm asking for a chance to know who you are now, to show you who I've become." She studied him for a long moment, her artist's eye taking in the changes 6 months had wrought. He was still impeccably dressed, but there was something softer about him now, something more human in the way he held himself. "There's a cafe around the corner," she said finally. "They make Ethiopian coffee almost as good as Georgetown's. We could talk." "I'd like that," he replied, understanding this was not a reconciliation, but a beginning. A chance to know each other again, not as husband and wife, but as two people who had loved, lost, and learned from both. As they walked through Montreal's snowy streets, Boetta realized that finding Averly had never been about reclaiming what they'd lost. It was about discovering what they might become, separately and perhaps, if they were very lucky, together again in some new way that honored both their dreams. The cafe was warm and inviting, smelling of coffee and possibility. As they sat across from each other, steam rising from their cups like memories given form, Boetta understood that some discoveries weren't endpoints, but beginnings. In the end, he had found not just Averly, but a new way of seeing the world, through eyes that could appreciate both digital precision and artistic chaos, both planned success and spontaneous joy. Outside, snow began to fall, each flake a perfect combination of natural beauty and geometric precision, much like the love story captured in the paintings hanging just around the corner. Chapter 11. The Reunion. The Montreal winter had softened into early spring by the time Boetta found himself standing in Averly's studio, surrounded by the evolution of her art. 2 weeks had passed since their coffee shop reunion, 2 weeks of careful conversations and rediscovered connections. Her workspace occupied the top floor of a converted textile factory in Mile End, its massive windows offering a view of Mount Royal, dusted with the last remnants of snow. Unlike her careful, pristine studio in DC, this space exploded with creative energy. Canvases leaned against every wall, some finished, others in various stages of completion. Paint splatters decorated the wooden floors like abstract constellations. The scent of oils and turpentine mixed with the aromatic Ethiopian coffee she still preferred, creating an atmosphere that was uniquely Averly. "You're missing board meetings," she said softly, watching him examine her latest work. A piece that showed their old penthouse view transformed into a digital garden, where flowers made of binary code bloomed among real cherry blossoms. "Yes," he replied, turning to face her, "and I've never been more certain of any decision." He showed her the changes he'd made, photos on his phone of his restructured office, his delegated responsibilities, his new approach to leadership. The final image was a promise written in paint on one of her blank canvases back in his DC office. "Some moments can't wait." Averly moved closer, studying the images. She wore paint-stained overalls over a simple black turtleneck, her braids pulled back with a colorful scarf. Success had changed her too. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, an assurance that came from standing on her own. "Tell me about the company," she said, gesturing to two paint-splattered chairs near the windows. "Really tell me, not the press release version." So he did. He told her about the completed Singapore expansion, but focused on the human stories, the local artists he'd hired to design their office spaces, the cultural consultants who'd helped them understand the community they were joining. He spoke about the changes he'd made to Capital Tech's structure, installing a strong management team that allowed him to step back from day-to-day operations. "I realized something," he said, watching the late afternoon light paint shadows across her face. "Technology should enhance life, not replace it. I'd built this empire focused on digital efficiency, but I'd forgotten why I started in the first place, to give people more time for what matters, not less." "And what matters to you now?" Avalee asked, her artist's eye noting the subtle changes in his posture, the way he seemed more present in his own skin. "Balance," he answered without hesitation. "The harmony between digital precision and human messiness, the beauty in imperfection." He gestured to her paint-splattered studio. "You taught me that, though it took losing you to understand the lesson." Avalee stood, moving to a canvas covered by a cloth. "I want to show you something," she said, pulling the fabric away to reveal a new painting. It showed their last dance in his office, but transformed. The figures were wrapped in streams of data that looked like embrace rather than imprisonment, their forms merging with both the digital and physical world in a way that suggested harmony rather than conflict. "I started this the day after you found me," she explained. "I needed to understand if what I was feeling was real or just nostalgia for what we had." "And what did you discover?" "That some love stories don't end. They just need to be repainted in different colors." She touched the canvas gently. "The woman I was in DC needed to break free, to find herself outside your shadow, but the woman I am now, she's strong enough to stand beside you without disappearing." Boetta moved closer, studying the painting with new understanding. "And the man I am now knows how to stand beside an equal without trying to control the composition." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Outside, Montreal life continued its rhythm, so different from DC's power-driven pulse. A street musician's saxophone drifted up from below, playing a jazz standard that reminded them both of Sunday mornings in their old apartment. "Dance with me," Boetta said suddenly, holding out his hand. "Not because of memories, but because of who we are now." Avalee looked at his offered hand, remembering another dance, another chance taken. "You're wearing an expensive suit," she warned, gesturing to her paint-splattered studio. "Some things are worth ruining a suit for," he smiled, the expression reaching his eyes in a way she hadn't seen in years. She took his hand. They moved together in the fading light, finding their rhythm among the canvases and creating their own art with their movements. Paint smudged on his jacket, colors transferred from her overalls to his pants, but neither cared. They were writing a new story, one that honored their past while embracing their changed selves. "I have a confession," Avalee said, as they swayed to the distant music. "I've been offered a position at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, head curator of contemporary art. They want me to build a new wing dedicated to digital art's intersection with traditional mediums." Boetta felt her tense slightly, waiting for his reaction. The old him might have seen this as a complication, an obstacle to be managed. The new him felt only pride and possibility. "That's incredible," he said sincerely. "Your vision has always been ahead of its time. They're lucky to have you." "It means I'll be staying in Montreal," she continued carefully, "building something of my own." "I know," he nodded. "And Capital Tech's Canadian headquarters could use a CEO who understands both the tech and cultural aspects of what we do." Avalee pulled back slightly, searching his face. You'd move to Montreal. The company doesn't need me in DC anymore. I've built a strong enough foundation that it can run without my constant presence. What it needs now is growth in new directions, understanding of different perspectives. He touched her cheek gently. Something you taught me the value of. And the penthouse. Your empire? Some emperors learn that ruling from a distance makes their kingdom stronger. His smile held both, humor and humility. Besides, I hear Montreal has excellent Ethiopian coffee. Avalie laughed, the sound echoing through her studio like music. It's not that simple, she cautioned. We're different people now. We can't just pick up where we left off. I don't want to pick up where we left off, Boeta replied. I want to start something new, something that honors both who we were and who we've become. She considered this, her artist's mind already composing the possibilities. We'd need rules, she said finally, real ones, not corporate guidelines that get overruled by the next crisis. Like what? Like no phones during dinner, like protected time for both our passions. Like understanding that success isn't just measured in market shares or gallery openings, but in moments of connection. Like dancing in paint-splattered studios, he suggested, drawing her closer. Like remembering that love is both art and science, spontaneity and planning, digital precision and human messiness. The last light of day painted her studio in gold, turning the paint splatters on the floor into a map of their journey, separate paths that had somehow led them back to each other. But this time they were meeting as equals, each strong in their own right, each ready to create something new together. There's one more thing, Avalie said softly, her hand finding his. Something I discovered a few weeks ago, something that made me start painting that new piece. She guided his hand to her stomach, still flat, but holding the promise of their future. Boeta's breath caught as understanding dawned, his eyes filling with tears that had nothing to do with market shares or corporate success. A masterpiece in progress, she whispered, watching joy transform his face. They stood together in the paint-splattered studio, the distant saxophones still playing, the city lights beginning to twinkle like stars. Two people who had lost their way found themselves and discovered that sometimes the most beautiful art comes from reimagining what's possible. "Stay for dinner?" Avalie asked, gesturing to her small kitchen area where fresh ingredients waited. "I thought we could cook together, like we used to on Sundays." Boeta reached for his phone, turned it off completely, not just silent but powered down, and placed it face down on a distant table. "I'd love to," he said. "Show me what you're creating these days." As they moved around her kitchen, sharing stories and rediscovering their rhythm, both understood that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. They were crafting something new, a love story painted in fresh colors, a partnership that celebrated both their strengths, a future that merged the best of both their worlds. Outside, Montreal prepared for spring, the last snow melting to reveal new growth beneath. Inside the studio, surrounded by art that told their story, two people who had once lost each other in the chaos of success discovered that sometimes love needs distance to grow stronger, needs breaking to be rebuilt better, needs loss to be truly appreciated. And if paint somehow found its way onto Boeta's expensive suit as they cooked, danced and reconnected, well, some things were worth ruining a suit for. Chapter 12. New Beginnings. 1 year after their Montreal reunion, spring had returned to bring new life to their world. The converted warehouse loft they now shared in Mile End had become a perfect blend of their two souls. One half a state-of-the-art home office with views of the city skyline, the other a sunlit studio where creativity flowed freely. But the heart of their home was the nursery, its walls painted with a mural that told their love story in shapes and colors that their daughter would one day understand. Avalie's pregnancy had transformed her art in unexpected ways. Her latest exhibition, Digital Genesis, combined traditional paintings with interactive technology, creating pieces that responded to viewers' presence. The Montreal Museum of Fine Arts had given her free rein to revolutionize their contemporary wing, and critics were calling her work a breakthrough in merging digital and traditional art forms. Boetta had kept his promise. Capital Tech's Canadian headquarters had become a model for corporate innovation, not just in technology, but in human-centered design. He had rebuilt his company culture from the ground up, creating an environment where creativity and efficiency coexisted in perfect balance. His board meetings now included artists and cultural consultants, ensuring that their digital innovations enhanced rather than replaced human connection. On this particular morning, they stood together on their rooftop garden, watching the sunrise paint Montreal in shades of promise. Avalie, now 8 months pregnant, leaned back against Boetta's chest as his hands cradled her swollen belly. Their daughter was active this morning, kicking as if dancing to the city's awakening rhythm. "She's going to be a handful," Avalie smiled, placing her hands over his, already refusing to follow any schedule. "Good," Boetta replied, kissing her temple. "Some things shouldn't be bound by timetables." They had learned to dance between their worlds. Their home had 2 calendars, one digital for business commitments, one hand-painted by Avalie for their personal life. The painted one took precedence, its days marked with family commitments, date nights, and protected time for each of their passions. They had found that structure could support spontaneity when given the right foundation. The nursery was a testament to their new balance. Its smart monitoring system was hidden behind whimsical murals. The crib, handcrafted by a local artisan, had been designed using advanced 3D modeling. Even the mobile above combined delicate painted figures with tiny LED lights that twinkled like stars. "I have something to show you," Avalie said, leading him back inside to her studio. In the corner stood a covered canvas, her tradition now for special revelations. She pulled away the cloth to reveal their entire journey, painted in a style that merged her artistic vision with digital elements. The piece showed them dancing in his DC office, but the scene transformed across the canvas, evolving into their Montreal life, their forms becoming more integrated, more balanced, until in the final section they stood together, a tiny third figure glowing between them. "It's for the hospital wing," she explained, "the new mother and child unit. They want art that tells stories of love and transformation." Boetta studied the painting, seeing their past, present and future flowing together in perfect harmony. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "like everything you create." "We create," she corrected, taking his hand. "I couldn't have found this style without understanding your world better, just like you couldn't have humanized your technology without embracing art." They had built something unique together, a life that celebrated both their strengths. Their Sunday brunches were sacred, phones turned off, time measured only by conversation and connection. Yet during the week, they embraced the power of technology to keep them connected across their busy schedules. Video calls let them share moments from their separate worlds, bridges built between art galleries and boardrooms. "Do you ever miss DC?" Avalie asked, wrapping her arms around him as best she could, with her pregnant belly between them. "I miss some things," he admitted, "the energy, the ambition. But I found something better here, perspective. The ability to see success not just as numbers on a screen, but as moments like this." As if in agreement, their daughter kicked again. They both laughed, the sound echoing through the studio that had become a symbol of their rebuilt love. Paint stains decorated the floor in a pattern that tracked their year together. Here, the splatter from when he'd surprised her with news of Capital Tech's new arts endowment. There, the drips from when she'd told him their baby was a girl. Later that evening, as they prepared dinner together in their open-plan kitchen, Boetta's phone rang with a familiar tone. Singapore, another crisis needing attention. But instead of rushing to his office, he glanced at Avalie, silently asking her preference. "Take it," she smiled, understanding in her eyes. "I'll keep your food warm." He did take the call, but not before kissing her deeply and touching her belly once more. The conversation was brief, efficient, handled with the expertise of a man who had learned that business emergencies rarely deserved the sacrifice of personal moments. When he returned to the kitchen, Avalie had set their table for dinner, candles lit despite the early hour. "Dance with me first," she asked, holding out her hand. Without hesitation he took it, leading her in a gentle sway that accommodated her pregnant form. No music played except the rhythm of their hearts. No agenda existed except this moment of connection. Paint from her afternoon work smudged his shirt, and he couldn't have cared less. "I love you," he said, the words carrying the weight of their journey. The loss, the growth, the rediscovery of what mattered most. "I love you too," she replied, her head resting on his chest. "All versions of you, the ambitious dreamer I met at Georgetown, the lost emperor of your digital realm, and most of all, the man who learned to dance between worlds." Their dinner grew cold as they danced in their Montreal kitchen, but neither minded. They had learned that some moments were worth sacrificing perfection for, that love lived in the messy intersections between order and chaos, planning and spontaneity, digital precision and human touch. Outside their windows, Montreal prepared for another stunning sunset. Their daughter continued her own dance within Avalie's belly, already learning the rhythm of their family's unique harmony. On Avalie's easel, paint dried on a canvas that told their story in shades of redemption and renewal. In Boetta's office, screens showed the steady pulse of his digital empire, now tempered by humanity and balance. They had found their way back to each other not by erasing their differences, but by celebrating them, not by compromising their dreams, but by weaving them together into something stronger. Their love story, once faded by ambition and distance, had been repainted in bolder colors, richer textures, deeper understanding. As night fell over Montreal, their home glowed with the light of possibility. In the nursery, the starlit mobile cast gentle shadows on walls that held their past and future. In Avalie's studio, brushes rested in water, ready for tomorrow's inspiration. In Boetta's office, computers hummed quietly, processing the day's data into patterns that served humanity rather than replaced it. And in their kitchen, two people who had once lost their way held each other close, dancing to music only they could hear, their hearts beating in time with the new life growing between them. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, like art, like technology, like life itself, was not about perfection but about connection, not about control, but about balance, not about endings, but about constant, beautiful beginnings. Their story, like the best works of art, would continue to evolve, each day adding new colors, new textures, new possibilities to their shared canvas. But now, they knew how to paint it together, how to blend their strengths, how to create something greater than either could achieve alone. In the end, they had built more than a marriage, more than a family, more than a bridge between their worlds. They had created a masterpiece of love, painted in shades of forgiveness, understanding and joy, signed with the promise of forever. Not perfect, but perfectly them.